Good evening. The Declaration of Independence held certain truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. Is that equal before the law, neither above it nor below it? Or should former presidents be immune from prosecution? Not just lawsuits while in office, but consequences for crimes even afterwards. That was the question before the Supreme Court in Washington today. In New York, the former president, currently on trial for conspiracy and corruption, said that if 9 justices failed to grant him immunity for official acts he'd taken in office, then future presidents would be inundated with prosecutions that would hamstring their ability to serve in the White House.
Argument on immunity is very important. The president has to have immunity. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with a president in the future, for 100 years from now. If you don't have immunity, you're not going to do anything. You're going to become a ceremonial president. You're just going to be doing nothing. You're not going to take any of the risks, both good and bad. I mean, you're going to make some great decisions and save the country, and you're going to make some decisions which are unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
But the justices in the Supreme Court were sceptical. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, questioned the scope of Trump's argument when it comes to official acts. Would a president really have immunity if they appointed an ambassador, Roberts asked, in exchange for a bribe? How would you determine if a president's actions are part of his official conduct? Justice Thomas asked whether they should differentiate between a president acting as president and the president acting as a candidate. And then this from Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
We would be creating a situation in which we would be saying, this is what you're asking us to say, which is that a president is entitled not to make a mistake, but more than that. A president is entitled for total personal gain to use the trappings of his office. That's what you're trying to get us to hold, without facing criminal liability.
The attorney for Special Counsel Jack Smith, who's prosecuting the attempts to overturn the election, pushed back against claims Donald Trump's efforts amounted to official acts as president. But the Chief Justice did push back on him, reminding the Special Counsel how easy it is for a prosecutor to get a grand jury to bring an indictment. Relying on the good faith of the prosecutor may not be enough, he said, in some cases. We'll talk about events in New York shortly. Our correspondent Neda Tawfiq will bring us up to date on the hush money case and the evidence we've been hearing today. But let's focus on the Supreme Court first. Gary O'Donoghue has been carrying that angle for us through the course of the day. Gary, as we've set out, I think, the justices appeared somewhat sceptical of his claim of absolute immunity. But there's a question here that needs to be answered. Do the allegations in the indictment fall under official acts of the presidency or not? Why is that relevant?
Well, because there's a distinction being drawn here, and interestingly, it's a distinction that one of the Conservative members of the court, Amy Coney Barrett, was very interested in, is whether or not any of the things that Donald Trump's actually accused of fall into the private realm, because Donald Trump's lawyers acknowledge that private acts in the private realm, were subject or can be subject to prosecution. And she went through some of the things that are a part of the indictment, and Donald Trump's lawyer acknowledged they were potentially in the private realm. So what you're starting, I think, to see here is a way forward where perhaps the Supreme Court says, look, there's a bunch of stuff in this case that may be subject to prosecution. There may be some areas of the original indictment that may be more problematic. Go back to the earlier courts, sort out, given our distinction between the official acts and the private acts, go back and sort out what you think you can actually prosecute, given that distinction, and restart the case. So I don't think what you're not going to get from this Supreme Court a kind of blanket total immunity. I think that's very clear from what we saw this morning. But you're also not going to get, I don't think, all's fine, carry on with this prosecution. I think it's going to be a much more grey area than that. And of course, that is going to introduce even more delays than the ones we've had up till now for this January the 6th case.
The other cases are delayed, Neda. The one in New York continues, and the witness, David Pecker, was back on the stand today, the former publisher of the National Enquirer. He was outlining on Tuesday the agreement that he'd reached with Donald Trump to buy and kill damaging stories ahead of the 2016 election. What more did we hear today?
Yeah, well, he went into further detail about two of those instances, Christian. First, with the Playboy model Karen McDougal. Now, David Pecker on the stand said that he had agreed with Michael Cohen to pay Karen McDougal at the direction of Donald Trump $150,000 to buy her story about an alleged affair, one that Donald Trump denies. And Michael Cohen had assured him that, you know, the boss will take care of it. You will be paid. But then David Pecker said, after speaking to his general counsel about being reimbursed, he was told it wasn't a good idea. He told Michael Cohen, don't reimburse me. It's a bad idea. Deal is off. And then we kind of use that, the prosecution has used that to kind of bridge to the Stormy Daniels payment and try to basically explain why, as they allege, Michael Cohen made the payment to Stormy Daniels at Donald Trump's direction. So that was one piece of it, Christian. But then again, back to this issue of intent, you just have David Pecker placing Donald Trump's concerns about the election at the forefront of all of their conversations. He even says after the fact at a dinner at the White House to thank him that Donald Trump asked David Pecker, you know, how is Karen? And later, when both her and Stormy Daniels did an interview with CNN, Donald Trump complained, he says, that they were breaking their agreement. And at one point, David Pecker even said Donald Trump said Stormy Daniels owed him $24 million for every time he mentioned his name, which was against their agreement.
Neda, Gary, thank you very much for that. That sets us up nicely. Let's bring in then the former US federal prosecutor, Sarah Christof. Sarah, always good to have you on the programme. Gary's laid out quite clearly the case before the Supreme Court. Where does this leave, do you think, Jack Smith and the January 6th case, which is before the lower courts in Washington?
Listen, it does not appear that that case is going to be proceeding quickly, and certainly not on the time frame that Jack Smith wants. There's a lot of really interesting questions raised by the court here on both sides of the aisle. They have a lot to sort through and muddle through, really, given the sort of the lack of case law they have to rely on, and it's very likely that they send this back down for some clarification on some of these points regarding the prosecution.
This issue of whether acts were committed under official duties, it's an important point. You can see why the Supreme Court wants to get this right, because if you think back to the case of George W. Bush at the time of the Iraq invasion, he went into Iraq without a UN resolution. There were some people who wanted to bring a prosecution against him on crimes of aggression. It would be limiting, wouldn't it, for a president if there was not immunity for some acts that were carried out within official duties?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Trump's team raises, some legitimate points here, legitimate arguments about essentially stunting the ability of the president to do their job. I mean, the thing is that, Trump's team sort of came in guns a-blazing, asking for this sort of overarching full, absolute immunity, which the court, it shot down very quickly, and Trump team backed off that a little bit, and now we have more nuanced legal arguments that took place, and more to come, frankly.
Yeah, just another quick word on another case that we've not introduced to our viewers. There was a decision today, a federal judge making a decision on the E. Jean Carroll case, the defamation case, and the $80 million or so that he's been ordered to pay her. What happened in that case?
So we got essentially the judge declined to throw out the jury verdict in that case. It's not a surprise. It's pretty sort of standard procedure after a verdict like that for the losing party to challenge that, to ask the judge to overturn the verdict. The judge said no, so the verdict stands.